Great. Okay. So starting again. Welcome everybody to our first webinar for our recent book, Usability for the World, Building Better Cities and Communities, recently published by Springer Nature. And I'm just super excited to be able to bring together some of the authors and talk about the book. And I'm here, as I mentioned a minute ago, with my co-editor, AJ. And we're going to be going around and asking our authors to talk about a little bit about themselves and then what they wrote. And then we'll have some time for questions afterwards.
Just a couple pieces of housekeeping before we
Thanks.
get started. So we have our panelists here today. We're also doing a session tomorrow because we have authors from all around the world. So we wanted to give people from different time zones an opportunity to talk with each other as well as attend. So please listen to this recording or the other one if you're able to join for that one. I have on my shared screen here an image of the book, so Usability for the World, Building Better Cities and Communities. And we have an open call for proposals for our following up books on education and healthcare. So if you're interested and you have something you'd like to publish in this space, feel free to check out this website, usabilityfortheworld.com. And I'll let Elizabeth take over from here to facilitate introductions to our other panelists.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you again for my amazing writing partner, AJ. As you can see, we really balance each other well. So I think that's why we were able to get this out, and I'm sure the rest of the authors can attest to it. So we have a format. We were going to go around and let each panelist talk about yourself and your basically the core message from your chapter. Now, some chapters have several authors, but I think I'm just going to call on the different authors. So we have Melanie Brewer, and this chapter was great, and also AJ was involved with this as author. So go ahead. This was one of the first, I think, the first chapter in the book. So why don't you go ahead, AJ, and introduce yourself and tell us, as you know, what's the key core argument or compelling insight that you found in your chapter?
And
Or
I'd like to invite Melanie to come off mute as well so we can kind of talk to each other about this chapter. So I think what was really interesting about this chapter is we took a couple of different approaches to a literary review that's at the intersection of how people are designing cities and how people in the field of HCI or usability are approaching their methods. So we were trying to look right at that intersection, look at the history of the evolution of those fields, the methodologies in those spaces, the metrics and how we start to measure things occurring in that intersection, as well as a number of case studies and their implications. Melanie, I'll hand it to you for some additional context there.
I think you covered it. It was a lot of fun to work on together with you and Marissa. What I liked about this chapter was that it brought together these diverse knowledge bases. So I felt like I had more of a background in usability and HCD, which AJ and Marissa both have. Marissa has deep expertise on sustainability in cities, so it was really, really fun to learn from her. And AJ is like bar none the expert when it comes to usability. So I learned a whole lot on working on this chapter. It was a lot of fun.
I think the thing that surprised me most about this work is that there's a lot of work that's being done at these intersections, and it was really an opportunity for us to bring it all together and collect it into a single collection of that. I think we ended up with over 60 pages of the review in the end, even highly edited down, choosing just some of the top case studies we could find. And I think this work is stood out as being done across the world in lots and lots of contexts, which makes it really interesting work.
Yeah,
yeah,
it was interesting to learn about some of the standards that have been developed for cities. I have a real interest in metrics and standards, and I was not aware of these robust resources where people have gone through and defined highly specific metrics and KPIs so that you can measure the success of sustainability and city success. So that was super interesting aspect of it.
Yeah, and I found it a great foundation because some of it hadn't really thought of. And then going through what you guys did was an eye opener for me as well. So we're going to circle back. I wanted everyone to just start off introducing and then talking a little bit. So the next author that we have is Makuchi Nkwo. I don't know if I hoped I pronounced your last name correctly. And so you were in the chapter, well, I'll let you talk about it, but I know you had a few people working with you. So the floor is yours, Makuchi.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, my name is Mark Kochi, and I'm teaching at the University of Greenwich in London, United Kingdom. Um, in our
Wait,
chapter,
wait,
which is
where,
titled,
what country?
that's United Kingdom, UK.
London, UK.
Oh, I've heard of that place. Yeah.
Good,
Thank you.
excellent.
Makuchi. Yeah.
Right. So our chapter is titled "Exploring Usability of AI Systems in the Global South." Towards responsible human-centered AI for sustainable cities and communities. And in this chapter, we worked on exploring a particular AI tool, trying to uncover what are the usability issues that influence or impact um, on its adoption in the global south, especially in Nigeria. For instance, we looked at an AI system that supports power conservation, because this tool or this system helps the users to register and buy electricity, and also find out how much they are spending on a monthly basis, for instance. And we try to explore how they use the system or how it impacts on the usability, user experience, user interaction, and all of those things. And we uncover that, of course, right from time, the issue with AI systems or technology adoption in the global south is that the perspective, the values, and all of those factors that relate to the target users were not integrated or incorporated in the design of these tools and technologies. So this actually also can be seen in the emerging AI tools that are in use. So we try to evaluate these systems using some usability technique, like the Neumann principles, and we found that there are issues with its usability, user experience, inclusiveness, sustainability, especially if it does not speak the values and the perspective of the users. It will definitely impact on its sustainability. People would definitely grow wary of using these systems when they don't know how it is used, or when it kind of goes against their values, when it harvests their data without their consent, when it does not allow them to communicate in their potentially local dialects. They will grow wary and may kind of stop using the system in the future. So we now came up with ideas to incorporate certain values, cultural values, social values that are related to the experience of the target users. In fact, this is a breakthrough principle that, if adopted in designing or redesigning existing technologies, or designing new technologies that target people in certain geographical areas, especially in the global south, it will make such systems to be sustainable, inclusive, and of course, it will reduce technology non-adoptions, so to say, among the target audience or the target users. And I worked with this on this subject with three other authors, so we are four in number. And it was an interesting experience, because every one of us actually came from we come from the global south, and everyone has got experience with working with these technologies in the global south. So we were able to review this tool, and it was an exciting experience, like I said. And I feel that our work contributes greatly to developing technologies that will satisfy the needs and the values of people in the global south. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I'm happy to hear from others about their own work.
Thank you, Mikuchi. And actually, it's connected very much, and I'll let AJ, if you want to ask me questions, to the chapter that I wrote on trustworthy, sustainable cities, because trust is the core that I think makes all of these things work. And what I
Exactly.
learned also from editing this is how much things like indigenous knowledge systems come into play, and it's a little, and it's exactly what you're talking about, Makuchi, but in that same thought of, how do we create trust in across the world, especially say global south, or with indigenous communities who maybe have a whole nother way of thinking about communities and cities. So I feel that just by looking into the topic of trust has opened my mind. And then working with all you authors has really pushed me to think about, well, what does create trust? Because in the examples I use in the chapter, it's really about some applications that I've seen that either through citizen science or other ways of showing transportation or various things that trust is created, and that helps with citizens being engaged in sustainable communities. So it's kind of like I hate to say vicious cycle, but it is sort of a, it self circulating cycle. Um, so let's see. So then we have folks from the last chapter, which is Henry Lieberman and Christopher Fry. And why don't you guys take turns and figure out, what you want to say about what where you left us at the end of this book with your last chapter.
Henry, go first.
You're on mute. I can try to unmute you. You gotta, let's see.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, so one issue that Fry and I have been thinking about related to trust that Liz was talking about is cooperation, and this is, and our goal is to try to make a more cooperative world, especially in cities and stuff. So I'm a research scientist at the MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab, CSAIL. I was at the Media Lab with Liz back in the day. And we're, my area is artificial intelligence and human computer interaction. And we're thinking about the application of user-centered design and trying to make an analogy between user-centered design and HCI and urban planning. Okay, and the principal problems that we're concerned with in the article are sort of fragmentation of concerns, which is due to the lack of cooperation between people. Everybody divides it up into everybody divides up their urban problems into some specialty or some particular economic concern, political concern. So that means that the poor citizens are kind of left out of the picture, that nobody is really looking out for their interests, in a holistic or in an integrated way. So that's what we're talking about. We call that the paradox of urban design. So even though we've had incredible technology improvements and the economy is growing, although in fits and starts, so we have a lot of resources and ideas and materials to make life better for everybody. But oddly enough, things don't seem to be improving very fast from the point of view of the average citizen of the average large metropolitan area. price of housing is going up. People are spending more and more higher percentage of their income on housing. It doesn't seem to be getting any better in transportation. The commutes are getting longer, and transportation is becoming more expensive, and traffic jams are unpleasant, and sometimes public transit is unpleasant. So how come, we have all this technology and we have all this economic improvement, and yet the average experience that a person has is not improving as fast as it should be? So we're trying to take a page from what happened in computer software design, which is the idea of user-centered design. So it used to be that when people were making computer applications, they would just list all the functions of the application and just put them on menus or have you type commands to do them. And the resulting interfaces were a mess, and people couldn't use them. Okay. To make a long story short, Don Norman and a lot of other people in the HCI field said what you really want to do is start with the cognitive tasks that from a psychological viewpoint that the user's faced with. And so you should do things like talk to people and ask them what their problems are, what their daily experience is like, right? Try to get an idea of how the technology is going to fit into their lives, right? And you want to design by imagining scenarios of what it could be like interacting with your technology. So, and this is and you have to take account of all the considerations, not just the economic or not just the social considerations, but everything. How are people going to feel about it? What kind of emotions is it going to spark in the users, and so forth? And so we want to apply this kind of methodology to urban design. I've grown up in big cities, and Fry also. We've spent our whole lives in big cities, and the view from the street is not the same view that you get from urban planners. So, and I think a lot of it has to do with lack of cooperation. So you have political factions fighting all the time. You have the companies that want to build stuff. You have the neighborhoods that don't want a lot of building in their neighborhood. You have car companies, gas companies. You have in transportation. You have various kinds of public transit, and it's kind of nobody's job to think about how all this stuff integrates. So we think that people ought to be using a lot of more. They ought to be talking to citizens, understanding the workflow of citizens' lives. They ought to be testing things constantly. So you make low fidelity prototypes, you test them, you get feedback, and I think this user-centered design methodology is going to be what gets us on a better road to making better cities and communities. Part of this is inspired by a book that Fry and I wrote called Why Can't We All Just Get Along? And that's a really big think book about the future of technology. And we see down the road, and then basically the idea is about cooperation between people. And so how do we so instead of saying, well, how do we use AI or how do we use smart cities or something, let's say, how can we use these technologies to make it easier for people to cooperate, right? So we don't have, city departments arguing with each other. We don't have companies arguing with each other. We don't have, because what happens is the big organizations wind up competing against the citizens, and the citizens have no power in this stuff, and so they wind up losing. Okay. So we see technologies like AI, biotech, and personal manufacturing could usher in an era of tremendous abundance. Okay, but we need to get the design processes working in service of the citizens in order to do that. So if you want to see where we're coming from on this, you can look at our book on whycan'twe.org. I have a TED Talk. And so we tried to apply some of those ideas to the urban design problem.
Thanks, Henry. I'm sure, Fry, you want to build on what he said?
Well, Henry stole a little bit of my thunder here, but that's good. He probably said it better than I could. I walk around the world with usability colored glasses on all the time. And I try to estimate how much is bad usability slowing us down in the economy. If you just like, and first of all, the economy, I will say, not just the dollar, but the triple bottom line, sustainability, respect for people, and everything. I think at minimum, it's 20%, but at maximum, it's 100%. So here's what I'd say. In our chapter, we picked two applications, housing and transportation, and those just so happen to be the number one and number two most expensive items for an average family. And coming up next is your next book, healthcare and education, really, and then maybe food is in there somewhere, right? But those are the big things. So the point of usability is to make people's lives better. That's the thing. It's not, oh, can I play this video game or everything? It's make their healthcare better, make their driving better, everything. And if you take it to the limit, um, well, Henry touched upon the personal factory. The idea of the personal factory can make everything that you need, including itself, and then everything becomes free, right? But the biggest problem in the personal factory is going to be usability. It just is. I have one of the old friend of mine on our book club meeting. He says, I can't even load the ink in my printer, my 2D HP $100 printer. How am I ever going to operate a personal factory? And I said to him, can you drive a car? He said, yeah. Okay, what's a car? A car is a computer with some appendages on it, some peripherals that actually moves itself. That's what a computer, that's what a car is today anyway. Actually, it's multiple computers and you can drive a car. Why? Because steering wheel, really obvious. You can shift into reverse, not so hard, put your foot on the brakes. No, you are programming a computer when you are doing all that stuff. If you're going to operate a personal factory to direct it to make what you want, you're going to have to figure out, well, what do I really want? And how am I going to customize it to my needs and all that stuff? So this usability stuff is not just important for today or 20 years ago, but I think usability is actually becoming more important as we get more technology and people are just frustrated as hell. Oh, we can do all this fancy stuff, virtual reality and all that stuff, but I can't connect my printer to my laptop. So this problem is so underappreciated, it's embarrassing. And what I hope that the title of the book will convey to at least some big decision makers is this is not a side issue. This is front and center for the economy.
That's a good bouncing off point to start a conversation with all of us. So I'm thinking of actually some folks. I think you might know, I can't remember. Makuchi, if you know, so there's a group of people who started World Usability in Nigeria last year. And we actually had a pre-panel about exactly this issue. So what's usability in terms of getting people like through the digital divide, right? Like if people, and this was the webinar, I think, Makuchi, I'm not sure if you are, know the folks who did World Usability Day in Nigeria, but the panel that we did before it was about the hurdle that people in remote parts of the country in Nigeria were having in terms of using digital government systems because they
Okay.
didn't trust them and they were therefore spending 24 or 48 hours just to go into the town to do it in person. And that struck me as a usability problem. I mean, and when we dug into it, part of it was trust.
Yeah.
And part of it was there was technology that people were using for point of sale in the stores in the remote areas,
Yeah.
but they weren't thinking they could use it for anything else, but it could be used for government systems, perhaps. but it was a usability problem to get to the other side of that. I don't know if you heard about any of that, Makuchi, or like, I know that there's a lot of concentric circles here of a Venn diagram where all these things connect. And that's why I like doing this globally and not just those of us in the US. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, in fact, I'm aware of the POS systems that it's used across the towns and cities, and it's basically to support money transfer
right,
for people. Exactly. So yeah, but many people do not know, just like you pointed out, that it could also be used to support some um services, government services. But the idea, but um the reality is that people do not trust that their data are protected
right.
when they are collected via these systems. So they would, you know, reasonably, have that fear. And that actually disrupts the government's plan to digitalize services for the people. Though I'm not aware of the group that you mentioned that did the panel, but this is actually an ongoing problem. And I think, um, if we're able to go to the root of this cause, like trying to buy into the or make or you know devise solutions, that's usability problem, like you pointed out. If there's any way we can be able to design these solutions so that people would find it easy to understand, and not just understand, but also operate and use these services beyond going to the kiosks or the shops that use this POS. They can actually do these things right from their smartphones. They can pay for those government services from the smartphones or from every other device they have on them, and that would facilitate or enhance our digitalization effort, that's the government digitalization effort, and also promote services or increase participation in the civic um, services or activities of the society. So yeah, it's a good move, and hopefully, we'll have several other people that would come in, jump into the whole thing, and ensure that it is achieved.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, thanks. Because, I mean, having written the chapter on trust, I was actually looking at everything through that lens. And I mean, a big piece of usability is that it matches the real world, that it does what you expect, that it
yeah,
protects your data.
great, excellent.
It's all those things. So, um, it's when you're saying usability, Fry, of course I agree with you, but I also feel like I look at it with as we say, a big like
Yeah,
sustainability is usability, right? Trust is usability.
use
It's which is why this book, honestly, is so exciting. I will just say before I move on, I've had two people actually who read this book recently who said, "Wow, I never thought of usability for cities, but I think I get that." So yay for that. So I think I have, unless anyone has something burning, I have a few discussion questions we can get to. Unless
I got something burning.
Okay, go ahead. I'll let you, and then I'll
So,
I'll allow it.
so the trust issue is like you meet a person, right? And why might you not trust them? Because they could potentially steal what you have, or maybe they could hurt you too, right? Right. But why would they steal what you have? Because they want it. Well, why do they want it? Because they don't have it. Well, why don't they have it? Because we have scarcity. So if we solve scarcity, we solve a lot of the trust issues. And and I want to say something about Africa in general. Africa has a lot of corruption. Of course, U.S. has a lot of corruption
Yeah,
now
be
too.
careful
But
what you're
you
going
know,
with. I may
but
rein you in.
but if we solve scarcity, then we get rid of a lot of this impetus for corruption, because that's what it's all about. Oh, we're poor, we need to collect more money and use the government to collect money from people and all that stuff. But we get rid of scarcity, and many of our problems just go away, including these payment options. if you can make what you need, you don't need money, and then you don't have a problem with, trusting, whether people can steal your money because you don't even have any money.
Thank
So,
you for that opinion and thought. And what I love about you and Henry's contribution is that you guys are giving us like a North Star to be thinking about. And then others, maybe like myself, are thinking about the steps to get us there,
yep, a
which
lot of steps.
also needed. So yeah, solving scarcity would be great. But I'd like to set the bar just a little lower. Uh,
I'd love to kind of ground us in an example to feed into the next kind of wave of why we're writing this. So, one of the examples that we write about in the literature review is based in Kenya, in Nairobi. Foreign investors came in and they built this roadway that was meant to solve the chronic congestion that's there. And it turns out that it didn't meet the needs of the locals and people aren't using it. So,
Wow.
there's research written about this. I also have firsthand experience being on that roadway and seeing the
Mm,
traffic contrast.
mm.
And so these are the types of examples whereas you travel through the world personally or you read about the research being done in these spaces where we can spend lots of money and waste it because we haven't factored in what humans need to operate within that system. So I think one of the questions, Elizabeth, that we wanted to hear from the authors was what is it about this topic that is something that brought you to the table that really is there anything that motivated you to write for this particular topic and book?
yes, I'll just go around. Um, so I don't know, Melanie, if you have thought, I know you did the review, but what inspired you to explore this?
I mean, I think for one thing, I was really curious to learn more about sustainability and about urban development. They were not topics that I knew a lot about going in. So no better way to learn than to do a literature review on a topic. Um, and, also I think for all of us, we are aware of the importance of sustainability because we can see around us things that are happening. For example, climate change. And so, obviously we want to do what we can, and usability and human-centered design are my skill sets. So I wanted to learn more about how I might apply this. And the process actually made me much more aware of what's going on around me in my own town, which actually is fairly sustainable. I live in Santa Barbara, California. We're lucky enough that we actually do things like design charrettes, and I became a lot more aware of those things that were happening already, efforts to do data visualizations that help city planners in our area. Or even there literally was a whole design process around our main street, which had been closed during COVID, and everyone wanted to know what to do with that street going forward. And they actually took each block and made each block a prototype, and tried different things. Should we have traffic on this one? Maybe we have bike lanes on this one. Maybe on this one we just have, walking areas. So that was really a cool thing for me to just become more aware of these intersections.
Wow, that's great. And that, yes, it's always nice to have positive examples of things that actually are happening in the world. Uh,
And the literature review made me aware that that is a luxury. You just can't do that kind of thing everywhere. It doesn't get done everywhere. And so, yeah, it gave me an appreciation for that too.
yeah, but I love the idea of a city having sections that are prototypes. I mean, it's pretty advanced. But again, they have some resources. So, um, Makuchi,
Mm.
what inspired you to explore this topic that you did in your chapter in our book?
Right. So basically, we were inspired to look at this because most technologies are designed, especially user-based technologies, they are designed, so to say, in the global north and exported into the global south. Um, when these technologies are, imported into countries like Nigeria or Kenya, the people that will use this system are indigenous people. They have their own way of life, they have their own language, they have their own values. And when these technologies don't speak their language, when it doesn't respect their values, when it tries to kind of harvest their data or interfere with their way of life, they will reject these tools, they will not use it. So we try to look at how can we um, integrate new features that will speak, or new facilities that will speak the language of the potential users. What are those things that the potential users would need? In fact, that's in our conclusion, we actually suggested a high level user studies that will harvest this data physically, but we kind of evaluated the tool, one of the AI tools that are currently in use, and we um, came up with some strategies, the normal interaction strategies, plus some of the other social and cultural values that can be integrated into these solutions in order to, if we believe that if it is integrated into AI systems, it would kind of help to speak the values or speak the language of the people, and will make the system a little bit usable until we conduct a high level user studies that will help us to understand fully what the users want. But for now, we think that integrating some social values, some persuasive features, some cultural values too, together with the regular or normal or nominal interaction design strategies, if we can integrate that into new systems, AI systems, or AI solutions, that would help to promote sustainability and usability of the technologies. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. AJ, I meant to ask you in the other order, what inspired you to explore, to do the lit review?
Yeah, I think the thing that's so we, Elizabeth and I have been working together on World Usability Day, and it is a day of celebration each year where global people around the globe come together and celebrate how usability can impact the world that we live in. And one of the things that she and I have been talking about is how we can think about applying human-centered design to these different problems as defined by the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals. I think for this topic in particular, though, what really stood out to me was that the UN estimates that over half the world's population lived in cities in 2022, and they estimate by 2050, 70% of the world will live in cities. So to me, this problem is really urgent, that more and more and more people are going to be living in either failing or thriving in urban environments. And so, what can we do to share the knowledge that already exists in the world on this topic?
Thanks. Okay, let's see. I'll go to Henry. What inspired you to explore this topic?
Well, I think partly my own experience. I grew up in New York, which is, a pretty big city, and I grew up in LA, and I think that just as observers, you see all the stuff that goes around you, and you start asking questions. How does this work? Why are people doing this? Why are people doing that? And everything is so complicated that it just kind of washes all over. If you just walk down the street, you hear 6 languages. You see, see people in different kinds of housing and different kinds of transportation, and so you kind of want to make sense of it all, I think. And then being researchers, we know that AI is coming. We know that all these technologies hold big potential for making things much better than they are now. So how do we put that stuff to work? And then from working with you, Liz, and thinking about user-centered design and being in the media lab, I think we kind of have the tools for doing much better job on a lot of this stuff than we have now. So I think we want to inspire people to think about how that can happen, and how we can. And again, one thing that people say to us as technologists is, oh, it's a people problem. It's not just a technical problem, right? But I think it's both. And I think the purpose of the technology should be to help people cooperate with one another. And I think that's what's really going to save us in the long term.
Thanks. Fry, Would you like to add anything to that?
Um, AJ mentioned a trend line of people moving into cities. And when we look at a lot of trend lines right now, they're not going in the right direction. We got to do something. So now, one of the good things about people moving into cities is, at least in the United States, they use less energy per capita than rural. And that's largely due to transportation. But that may not be true all over the world. And we know that if the rest of the world just sort of duplicated the US technology and stuff, we'd all be dead. So we got to get out ahead of these trend lines and do something else. Elizabeth, you mentioned the digital divide, and there's also another implicit divide of city and non-city. So I like to not think about binary stuff, but stretch it out into a continuum. And my hope is that if we can get manufacturing cheap enough, that there will be much less of a digital divide in terms of computers and smartphones and all that stuff, right? And then if we get transportation in good shape, like the personal rapid transit that we talked about in our chapter, that smear what it really means to be in a city. Because I think the real impetus of a city is it makes it faster for a person to get from their home to their job. But if we have, and now it's taking longer and longer in a city, just live in the same city, more traffic takes longer. But if we do something about transportation, we can alleviate that problem and get out of these binaries and into these continuums of thought and get out ahead of those trend lines. It's good that we have them so that it scares us to motivate us and get us to do something.
I agree. I mean, we're talking about growth versus circular economy, I think is which could be a whole nother
Yes.
in and of itself. But just before we go into the next question, I actually was inspired long ago by the 2000 election and how the design of the voting really impacted the outcome of the election. And ever since, I've been thinking about civic design and then traveling around the world and also running World Usability Day, then noticing how certain countries handle certain things really well. Like there's a lot of countries in Scandinavia that are doing a great job with recycling, and it's so easy. It's just like so easy. And then others not so much, but maybe they do a better job with transportation, or maybe there are countries that do a good job with all of it. I mean, Japan, there's no garbage and there's no garbage cans on the street, So think about
Mm.
those interesting things that are happening. So for me, travel is really the second thing that inspired me, and just looking and running World Usability Day and even thinking, well, what does usability mean all around the world? Or a more interesting question too is how come someone who's a well-trained doctor but maybe gets onto some piece of technology they don't understand, and then they suddenly say, oh, I'm not good at tech. And you're thinking, you went to medical school and you're a surgeon, you certainly could be good at tech. Why would you say that? So there's so many layers to this. So that's sort of my thinking. But all right,
Mm.
I'm going to go around maybe the same order. And I would like to hear if you guys share an example of a city or a project that embodies the principles that you are describing. Fry, how about you? Do you have one?
If you'll allow me to do two, I'll do two.
Sure, go.
One of them is in my distant past. So as a freshman, I went to UCSB, and I'm looking at you, Melanie. I lived in Isla Vista, and in some sense, it's this university community just outside of Santa Barbara, basically. And in some sense, this was the 1970s. It was idyllic. I had a bicycle, as did almost everybody else, and it was small, a small town, relatively big university for a small town. But you you met people on the street. It was maybe 10,000 students there at the time. Now I bet there's more. So it was kind of idyllic in that sense. But in another sense, it had the opposite. And I was just thinking about it today. I had at least two interactions with the authorities who, for that era, the analog of them today would be ICE. So it was interesting. I was put in solitary confinement for a week for the crime of being 17 on the street after 10 p.m. So, kind of sounds like, oh, that's sort of like today. Okay, now to fast forward to, future and stuff. Right now, I'm involved in a project that may transform Burkina Faso and perhaps the rest of West Africa. And so we're working on a big project that will involve both transportation and housing. Um, it's almost like I'm ready to write another chapter for this same book about urban design because I've been working a lot on this concept called circular cities, and you can imagine what it is. Everything's integrated and very synergistic with relatively low cost buildings that are relatively high in quality. So there's my historical analysis, and then hopefully, in the next few years, we'll get on the road to doing the right thing. And I'm sad to say, but doesn't look like it's going to happen in the USA for a while.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And I do like the aspirational ideas you and Henry bring to us. So I'm just going to jump around a little. So Makuchi, can you share an example of a studio project that embodies the principles that you've described in your chapter?
Yes, thank you. In Nigeria currently, there's that's for mobile telecommunication. Um, what these companies do is that they kind of integrate local languages and features into the system such that when subscribers call in for maybe some issues, they would request or they would ask them to choose their preferred language, choose their preferred mode of communication if it's going to be text or if it is going to be by voice. All of these things, ensures that users are actually put in control, like they are supported and these things ensures usability of the solutions. They factored in the needs of the people. So in fact, that's part of the motivation that we looked at, that if these people can do this, then it's possible to also integrate. That's for a private company. So if we can be able to integrate that into some other services that user based, like we have variety of people that use such solutions, if we can integrate these um, um, solutions or services or incorporate some of these features so that the users will be able to make choices, have opportunity to select what option they would need, what option that will support them best in accessing those services. That would be wonderful. So that's a typical example. And of course, there are other systems. For instance, in my dissertation, I did a project that reviewed waste management services in the country, that's in Nigeria, and I was able to come up with some strategies that I integrated into a web-based waste management system that will support the users to or promote effective and efficient waste management system, although it is specifically designed to support a local community. But these things allow them to interact with the solution and, of course, with the other service personnel that will. It's kind of a bi-directional service that allows interaction between the users and the waste managers. So, and it allows them to speak their language. It allows them to communicate in real time and access the services and even call for clearance of the waste bins and all of that. So if these things can be extended into the state services, whether it's for the environmental management or for power management or for some other services that the government can provide, it will facilitate the adoption of digital systems or digital solutions in the country. And of course, when strategies that speak the values of the people are integrated into that, it will promote usability of these things and ensure that these systems are adopted for what it is meant for or what it is designed for. Right.
Great example. I like hearing all these examples. Melanie, how about you? I'm sure after the lit review, you can share 2 examples of a city or project that embodies the principles.
So we kind of divided the labor, and Marissa and AJ did a lot on that section. But one city that did stand out to me in some of the reading that I did was Singapore. And I can't remember the details of all of their different initiatives, but they've got an enormous number of them. And another one that's closer to home is San Francisco, which has this like very audacious, like zero waste by 2030 or something goal, which is pretty cool. And the other thing that this sparks for me is like just broadly, I think like we talked about housing and the sustainability issues around that. And I think one really interesting thing that is happening right now is the conversion of office buildings into housing and malls into housing. And like it's really neat because there's a lot of space in those structures. And now times have changed. We don't need to all physically gather in one space so that we can actually share, we don't have to share a standing diagram with someone. We can just share it over the screen. And I think I've found that to be really inspiring to see and really exciting. I hope it works.
Yeah, that's great. It reminds me a little bit of like warehouses that were being converted in the last century, I guess. Sometimes it's great results.
There's so much potential, the sheer square footage. Like I was in LA over the weekend, and when you look around at these buildings, and a lot of them have vacancy signs on them or are for sale, you're just thinking this is a lot of great square footage that people could live in. And that's the big rate limiting step, right? Especially in cities where there's so much density, is like where do you get the housing? And that's so much more impactful than potentially granny units, just in the sheer number in one building. So I like
Absolutely. And also more sustainable. I mean, seeing good buildings get knocked down so they can just build some different building, to me is
Mm-hmm.
very irritating. But AJ, did you uncover any since that was your
Yeah. The thing I was going to highlight, I think one of the things that I'm very passionate about after this work is the research, seeing the examples of research methods being applied in this context. So the field of transportation has seen an acceleration of more and more HCD research and applications being integrated. And the one that stands out to me is it was by Sayabina in 2021. And this is a transportation system study where they took a look at Indonesia's public transportation system. And they worked with students who had gone to school in South Korea and had the lived experience of both taking transportation in South Korea as well as in Indonesia. And they found that their preferences were widely variable based on where they were currently living in terms of which of those systems worked best for them and their reasoning around it. So, for example, in Indonesia, they preferred private vehicles because they had dissatisfaction with the public transit, and it also was more convenient, whereas they preferred public transit in South Korea. So I think this is a really nice example of bringing in participants who have lived experiences that we can learn from as designers and compare and contrast their experiences and then be able to take away some really key insights into what can then be brought into the existing home system.
Oh, that's a good one.
Mm.
Thanks. Henry, why don't you?
Yeah, maybe just to continue a little bit about the transportation theme here. Fry didn't really explain what the transportation idea was that he's planning to do in Africa, but the idea is called personal rapid transit. Okay, And the idea is that it's kind of a cross between a train and a car, you could think of. And if you, you know, we did in the article, we did a little analysis. What do people like about cars? What do people like about personal transportation? What are the requirements, you know? And I think the things that, what people like about cars is the fact that they're point to point on demand. Okay. And so the question is, could you do that with a shared use transportation system? You know, and that's the idea of personal rapid transit. So the idea is, so you have, you know, a rail system running overhead, kind of, you know, with the cars hanging from the track rather than sit on top of it. And then you have what in computer science we call a packet switch network, where you tell where you say where you're going, and then the system globally manages the connections so that everybody gets to where they're going as fast as possible. Okay, and we have reason to believe that this would be, you know, just on any criteria that you could imagine, that it would be cheaper to build, cheaper to maintain. The commutes, it would run at, it basically runs at a constant, you know, 35 or 40 miles an hour in the city. So, you know, it would be much faster, you know, not subject to traffic jams as much. And so the question is, you know, if you got this thing that meets all the criteria, you know, why isn't it being adopted? You know, and there are a few systems around. There's one in Heathrow Airport, there's in the Middle East, in West Virginia was the first one. You know, and so I think we need to think about what our urban planning thing is. If somebody comes up with some great idea, you know, the problem is it gets stalled by all these vested interests and NIMBYs and all this stuff. So we need to think about our design processes in such a way that allow new and different radical ideas to take hold, or at least to try experiments with them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, that, I mean, and you know, if we had a lot more time, we could spend a lot of time talking about barriers. I mean, there's so many aspects of this. But I know we want to.
I'd love to share the final question for our time today, just to get everyone's input on this, because I think part of this work is really in the nitty-gritty details, but I also want to invite all the authors to think about and share, you know, if we think ahead 10 years, what would make you feel this book has had a real impact? And Elizabeth, I'd love to hand that to you first.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. It's, you know, so I'm going to hold it up. I love doing this. Okay, here's the book, right? Great book. As I mentioned, a couple people that I know have actually read it already said, wow, I never thought about usability for cities. Okay, so that's the first step. That's not the complete goal of the book. So in what did you say, 10 years? I mean, that we have, first of all, that we're not sitting here struggling with a few examples, that we could put examples to every single city that we live in or have been to, and that it's that the citizens are understanding what the importance is, so that they're helping from the grassroots. I mean, partially, this is the goal of World Usability Day also, which is why we're writing these usability for the world, because it is, as some of you have said, usability to me, it is the lens to look at everything through. Because if it's usable for a human and it's usable for the other species and their ecosystems, we're done. And so that is, yes, I like also setting the bar very high, which is why, you know, Fry and Henry's vision is something that we're like sort of ending with. But I'm not sure we'll get to the, you know, community, the maker community in 10 years. But that there's a shift in how we develop things, and that the values of what I'm calling usability are just taken for granted now. It's like a human right. It's like what we're all doing. That to me would be success. So thanks for asking.
Melanie, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. And I guess mine would be a subset of Elizabeth's, because in our chapter, we framed a lot of things around the United Nations Sustainable Goal 11, which has to do with sustainable cities and communities, which was something I was not familiar with before the book. It's really an amazing, you know, goal. And I would hope that we're closer to reaching it than we are today. I think it was set up in 2015. I think the goals were set for 2030. So I hope we get there by 2030 using, these types of methods, which are not that hard to do. Like I hope that comes through in the book too, that these are fairly accessible in general, these human-centered methods.
Fred, do you want to go next?
Well, let's see. I started out saying I look at the world in rose-colored glasses through usability, and I see problems everywhere. And here's an example. You see a notice on a bulletin board about some event. It's missing the name of the event, where it is, what time of day, what day of the week it is. It's missing some essential piece of information, right? Why is that? Because there's volunteers all over the place creating all this stuff, right? So we need to get usability into the heads of basically everyone. So what's the strategy for that? Well, how about this book becomes a standard text in colleges for teaching teachers who become the usability teachers in high schools. And you don't graduate from high school without a class in usability. There's a vision for 10 years.
Usability everywhere, not just for the
Yeah,
world.
well, I think so.
Makuchi, what about you? What do you hope the book would signal that the book has had a real impact 10 years from now?
Well, in 10 years from now, I would like to see a situation where not just the designers integrating these ideas we've suggested in the book, but also the users understanding how usability work because they need to understand. I do not think that it is everything. It might be very difficult to integrate some of the features, or it might be very difficult to integrate certain features that will appeal to the generality of the audience, in certain geographical areas. So I like to see a situation where we'll be able to break down these principles and teach people in the local communities how these things work. If they can understand it from the basics, I think they'll be able to appreciate how to use these AI tools because the reality is that it has come to stay and everyone have got to come up to speed to both using these tools and designing these tools. So yes, hopefully people will be able to learn and understand beyond, of course, we also want the designers to integrate these things in order to make it easy for the users. But at the same time, users will also need to understand how to use these AI tools effectively to realize their or to perform their target behaviors. Thank you.
Really sounds like we're all looking for everyone to understand usability and value it. Henry, what would you like to add to that?
I was just thinking about the phrase that that Liz was using of digital divide, and I think that maybe we should be more talking about. And I noticed Makuchi's background there is at the Golden Gate Bridge there, but why don't we stop talking about digital divides and start talking about digital bridges? Because what goes over a divide? Well, a bridge. Right. Okay. And I think that, if you just think about conventional industrial economy, there is, the difference between the third world or the developing world and the first world, is really, it's hard to bridge, right? But I think it's easier in the digital realm because, even in Nigeria, they're using phones and computers, they're
Yeah.
on the same internet that everybody else is. Maybe I've got a more expensive phone than somebody in Nigeria, but that'll catch up, very quickly, But so I think that, it's kind of all one world now, in the digital thing. And I think that's the opportunity, So we ought to be thinking about how to build more bridges rather than, be focused on the divide or divisions. I think it's So, certainly with AI, the way AI is working in translation now, it's perfectly feasible to have, every piece of software in thousands of languages,
Exactly.
to do that. So some of these things that we haven't been able to do in the past, or that seem like a divide, can now, I think, uh, be dealt with. And so by building some digital bridges. So I think that's the thing to think about.
I'll stand corrected also because the title of our book does say building better. Building, 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 building. So thank you, Henry, for sort of a more positive angle on this. I will move forward with that language.
Oh, I have to interject something. You mentioned language, and Mukuchi mentioned language. Henry said digital divide, which makes a quantity smaller. But how about digital multiply, where we actually increase the value and we get on the positive spiral instead of this negative spiral of divide. And Henry, you're a math major from MIT, so it's embarrassing that I had to bring that up, and you brought up the transportation notion of bridges, but they're both true.
Ah, great. Let's see. What about you, AJ? What do you think?
Yeah, the final question. Yeah, I think I've said this in other panels we've done together, which is I think that, and it ties together what I'm hearing from everyone else, but the vision I have for 10 years from now is that people start to maybe vote or show their power or their voice with usability being a really important metric for them. So I will look for politicians who will help make my city more usable rather than maybe more narrowly focus on certain aspects of other things. I really want people who take the human at the center, especially as we get into more automation, self-driving car. I'm here in Austin. We have self-driving cars on every street. We're living in a rapidly changing AI environment. And I think that as we move forward so quickly with all this progress or not, I think a really important thing is how do we measure and make sure the human stays at the center?
I think we're all on the same page there.
So with that, I think that's our official set of questions for today. So thanks for all our panelists being here. We did want to open up for any questions either the panelists may have for each other or that any of the folks listening in have today. So anyone have any other topics they'd like to explore today before we end?
How do we get a cheap hard copy of the book?
I'm sure that's we're not in control of that. I'll just tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
We're happy to talk offline.
I will talk offline.
Well, if we get a personal factory, we can copy it, and that'll be maybe
Well,
that's the solution.
you have the ebook. Everyone should have the ebook. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
All right. Well, with that, thanks everyone so much for spending some extra time together. It's really interesting. I think kind of reflecting back on the book process, we all had a chance to meet last summer and kind of talk about why we wanted to work on this project and what kinds of ideas or questions or terminology were coming up and how we might attack that together. And it's really special to be on the other side of that, looking at everyone and sharing this conversation. So thanks so much for spending that time today and on this project as a whole.
Yes,
And
and
congrats
I'll
to our
just
editors.
yeah, well, let me just, I mean, this was such a good group project, and I have never done any project like this quite so quickly. It's it's definitely it's all of you, but AJ's one great organizer. So all of that together.
Thank you all for your commitment to the project. I think that really made a difference.
Yes, definitely. It was really fun. So let's keep doing the good work and making our world more usable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good.
Right.
All right. Well, we'll see some of you tomorrow, and we look forward to hearing back feedback on how this went. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.